Do you believe that everything we experience is just the result of logic and reason? What if I told you that a simple night's sleep can completely change your existence? Not just what you see when you wake up, but who you are. This story is not just strange. It is a direct challenge to what you understand as reality. A woman, alone on a road, decided to spend the night in a seemingly ordinary hotel. But when dawn broke, nothing, absolutely nothing, was the same. Not the weather, not the people, not the mirror. And the scariest thing? She found an obituary with her name on it, published the day before. Is it possible to live in more than one reality? Can time bend? This true story, and yes, documented in ways you won't believe, will make you rethink every choice, every memory, and even that chill you feel for no reason. Get ready to dive into a journey that mixes love, fear, reconciliation, hope, and a type of wisdom that few people have access to. If you've ever had the feeling of being out of place, maybe this story will explain why. Or perhaps it will awaken you to something that has always been there, just waiting for you to open the right door. The road wound through hills covered in mist, while thick drops of rain fell on the windshield of Emma's car, as if the entire sky were crying in secret. Tired, her eyes burned and her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. There was something solitary about that journey, a kind of silence that seemed to speak to the most hidden insecurities of the soul. When she saw the old hotel on the side of the road, the flashing red sign Pinewood Inn seemed like a call. The parking lot was almost empty, the air heavy with humidity and a faint smell of wet wood. Upon entering the lobby, Emma was greeted by a receptionist with indecipherable features. His forced smile did not match his cold gaze. The clock behind the counter had no hands. A silly detail, perhaps, but capable of planting the seed of estrangement. It was as if time had given up on passing inside there. As she filled out the information in the logbook, Emma noticed the crooked paintings on the walls, portraits of people dressed in old-fashioned ways, almost like ghosts framed in paint and canvas. The room, though silent, seemed to speak. Every creak of the floor, every crack of the soaked wood, carried a story that time had not been able to erase. The hallway to her room was too long for such a small hotel, and the silence, that muffled, dense silence, followed her like an invisible shadow. Emma tried to distract herself by thinking about the trip, about the next day's commitments, but there was something in the atmosphere that demanded attention. And the most disturbing detail was, everything there seemed to want her to stay. Not as a guest, but as part of the place. A feeling that defied logic, but spoke directly to her fears and her need for understanding and meaning. As she turned the key to room 6, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The interior of the room was simple, but charged with a strange nostalgia, as if it had been decorated to please memories she didn't even know she had. The patchwork quilt reminded her of her grandmother's house. The scent of lavender in the air evoked lost afternoons of childhood. And at the same time, there was something out of place. The bathroom mirror reflected the image with a slight delay. The lamps flickered, as if hesitant to illuminate that space. Emma lay down on the bed trying to find a respite from sleep, but she already felt, in her quietest, innermost being, that something there was not just physical. It was a portal to something greater. Something that would require courage, hope, and a resilience she didn't yet know she had, and little did she know that this would only be the first door. Night fell like a thick veil over the old Pinewood Inn, and with it came a silence that wasn't exactly peaceful. It was thick, almost solid, as if it breathed along with the walls. Emma, curled up in the rough sheets of her bed, tried to surrender, to sleep, but something seemed to be pulsing in the air. Around 2 in the morning, a loud cracking sound from the ceiling woke her. Her heart raced. At first, she thought it was just the sound of rain or some animal in the attic, but then came the whispers. Disjointed sentences, voices that sounded old and childish at the same time, mixed with a slow shuffling of footsteps down the hallway. The sounds were as if someone or something were testing the limits of reality and sanity. A flash of blue light invaded the room through the window, illuminating for a second Emma's pale face, bathed in a mixture of fear and disbelief. She stood up with hesitant steps and looked out the window. The street was empty, no cars, no movement. Only the fog dancing like a living entity. That blue light, cold, almost supernatural, seemed to come from an impossible place, as if it didn't belong to this world. Emma tried to calm her heart with rational thoughts, but her instincts were stronger. Something was watching her. She went back to bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes tightly, like a child seeking the comfort of illusion. And that was when the dream began. But calling it a dream would be an insult to reality itself. She saw herself walking through the hotel corridors, but everything was distorted. The paintings were crying, the doors whispered, and the receptionist wore a faceless mask. In the background, a child laughed as he repeated her name, Emma. When she woke up, gasping for breath, she felt her heart beating like a drum inside her chest. The clock in the room still had no hands. But time had passed. She could feel it in her bones. Every fiber of her body vibrated as if she had crossed an invisible border. And when she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see her reflection. She saw the entire room behind her, empty, but with the door ajar. A door she swore she had locked. There, in that moment, Emma began to understand that reality, or what she thought was reality, could have cracks. And in those cracks, loneliness could take shape. She didn't yet know what she was facing, but something inside her whispered, "You're not dreaming." And when instinct speaks louder than reason, perhaps what's needed is more than logic. Perhaps what saves is courage. The humility to accept the inexplicable, and the silent faith in the power of the kindness of the invisible. The morning sun crept through the cracks in the curtains like golden fingers trying to gently wake Emma. She got up groggy, believing that it had all been just a strange dream, the kind that leaves a bittersweet taste in your soul. But when she went down to the hotel lobby to get coffee, the world seemed to have changed its tone. There was a different stillness in the air, a slower pace in each step of the people. Outside, through the window, she saw rounded cars with shiny paintwork, like the ones she had only seen in exhibitions or old movies. And what's more, the people were wearing clothes from the 1950s, men in felt hats, women in flared dresses and impeccable hairdos. Emma blinked several times, as if her eyes could deceive what her heart already knew. Something had turned inside out. She crossed the street as if she were stepping onto another planet, with each step soaked in perplexity. The shops had signs, in cursive letters, windows with old radios, and the sound that escaped from a small speaker in the square was unchained melody, lulling the wind with pure nostalgia. Stopping in front of a mirror in the barbershop on the corner, Emma froze. Her face wasn't the same. It was there, but something about it seemed softened, or maybe younger, as if time had receded in imperceptible details. She touched her face, searching for some explanation, but what she found was a disconcerting absence. There was no cell phone in her pocket, nor wallet. The only thing she carried was the key to room 6, now looking even more worn, as if it had crossed generations. She tried to interact with a few people, but no one recognized her. They didn't even seem to notice her strangeness. It was as if she had always been there, a piece that had been fitted without being invited. And that, paradoxically, gave her a chill down her spine and a strange sense of belonging. Emma, still not fully understanding what was happening, felt something stirring inside her, an old feeling of longing mixed with the certainty that she was about to discover something important. A silent reminder that sometimes answers only appear when logic dissolves. Hope, in these moments, becomes a beacon and understanding, a map drawn with the invisible ink of intuition. Little did she know that the mirror in the barber shop was only the first reflection of a spiraling world. Her instinct was immediate: to seek help, some rational explanation. Emma searched the room for her cell phone, and there it was, intact, with the same blue case she had been using since last year. But when she tried to unlock it, the screen froze. No signal, no time, no apps working. She pressed the buttons, shook it, turned it off and on again. Nothing. The interface looked old, as if it had gone back decades, and yet strangely unfamiliar. With her heart racing, she hurried down to the reception, where the same woman from the night before, now more serious, with an almost hostile air, greeted her with a blank look. Emma identified herself: name, room, check-in time. The woman looked at the papers and denied everything. "Sorry, miss, I have no record of you here." That was like a punch in the stomach. Her name suddenly no longer existed. On impulse, Emma showed her ID, her work badge, even her credit card. The receptionist took the documents, examined them suspiciously, and handed them back, saying, "This isn't real." Her words sounded like a sentence. That strange feeling of loneliness grew in Emma like a cold wave. She left the place disoriented, searching for familiar faces, some contact that would anchor her in reality. But everything and everyone seemed to float on another frequency. It was like a vivid nightmare, but where the pain was palpable and the fear had a smell. Even the colors seemed faded, and time was suspended. There was no more yesterday or tomorrow, only an eternal, strange, and silent present. And in this present, the scariest thing was the feeling of no longer belonging anywhere, of being present and yet invisible. Along the way, she tried to use the landline in the lobby, but when she dialed the numbers of her mother, of a friend, of any recent contact, she heard only static. Emma felt the thread of reality slipping through her fingers. It was no longer just the fear of the unknown. It was the heartbreaking feeling of losing herself. What do you do when no one recognizes your existence? When even your reflection in the mirror hesitates to confirm who you are? At times like these, your soul cries out for something more than logic. It cries out for affection, for some manifestation of humanity. Emma, even overcome by confusion, knew she needed to hold on to her confidence. It was there, in the midst of doubt, that resilience began to germinate. The question that echoed within her was, if the world has forgotten me, can I forget myself too? And so a new door, invisible and without a handle, began to form in her mind. The next morning, Emma went down to breakfast, carrying the weight of a restless mind. The simple table in the dining room had toasted sliced bread, cubed butter, and a cup of black coffee, strong as the feeling she was trying to digest. Next to the sugar bowl lay an old newspaper, its pages yellowed with age, as if it had just come out of a museum. Curious and a little desperate for any clue, she picked up the paper and leafed through it quickly. The date at the top, October 6, 1961. Her heart sank. This didn't make sense. The headlines talked about Kennedy, about the Cold War. Until on the second-to-last page, between funeral home advertisements and black and white photos, she saw it, the obituary. With her name, Emma Collins, the date of death, yesterday. The place of death, room 6, Pinewood Inn. It felt like falling into a bottomless pit. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. The description was vague. It only said that the guest had died of undetermined causes, but it mentioned her full name, her hometown, and even the color of the car she was traveling in. Everything. Emma felt her world spin. A part of her wanted to tear that page, deny what she saw, like a child covering her eyes in fear. But another part knew knew that this was more than a coincidence. It was an echo of something bigger, something that might have been written even before her arrival. That obituary was more than a warning. It was a key, a revelation, a cruel invitation to acceptance. And there, in the middle of the empty room, with her eyes filled with tears and her soul in tatters, she understood. Maybe she was no longer fighting to return. Maybe she was trying to understand why she had come here. Instinctively, she put the newspaper in her bag. Something inside her told her that this was more than just old paper. It was proof that she existed between realities, between layers of what is and what was. Fear was still overwhelming, but it was beginning to share space with curiosity. And strangely, with gratitude for being alive or almost alive. Her head was still spinning, but her heart was beginning to search for meaning. Emma felt that she could no longer trust her eyes alone. She needed the ancient wisdom, the one that comes from intuition, from subtle perception. She needed the power of honesty with herself, of accepting what she did not understand. And at that moment, the hotel door opened, and an elderly man entered. Leaning on a cane, his eyes met hers with a strange glow. A look of someone who already knew. And she knew, deep in her heart, he was the next chapter in this story. He approached with slow steps, his cane creaking on the ancient floor like a clock without time. His eyes were gray, deep, as if they held entire ages of secrets. He wore a worn but neat suit, and he spoke with the serenity of someone who has seen too much. "You fell here too, didn't you?" The question came softly, almost a whisper, but it pierced Emma's mind like a needle. She nodded without knowing why. The old man introduced himself only as Harold. He said he had arrived there in 1974, after a car accident on the same winding road that now seemed to have swallowed up all paths. Since then, he hadn't aged. Not really. His eyes, although tired, still had that shine, a shine of someone who has learned to live between what is and what could have been. Calmly, Harold told her about the hotel, a rupture point between worlds, between times, between versions of the same soul. Each guest who arrived there was drawn by something unresolved. Guilt, loss, misunderstood choices. The Pinewood Inn, he said, was like a quantum mirror. It reflected not what we are, but what we could be. Emma listened silently, as if listening to an oracle. He spoke of doors that led to the past, the future, parallel realities, some beautiful, some dark, all real in some way. And he said more. Time there did not flow. It bent. It adapted to what each visitor needed to learn. This required more than logic. It required emotional resilience, humility to confront one's own shadows, and the ability to recognize that sometimes the greatest form of love is to forgive oneself. Emma tried to ask if there was a way out, a way back. Harold just smiled with a sadness that seemed ancient. He said that once every 50 years someone could get out, or free someone else who had been imprisoned there before. It was a cycle, a test perhaps. The Pinewood doesn't imprison anyone. It forces you to choose, he said, looking her in the eye. Those words resonated deeply. And for the first time, Emma felt that there was a purpose behind it all. It wasn't just madness or coincidence. It was destiny. And in destiny, as Harold knew, there's no room for cowardice. Compassion was the key. Selflessness was the password. Fear still haunted Emma's heart, but now it walked hand in hand with something new, trust. Because the old man didn't just know too much, he was the living reminder that there is wisdom in losing yourself, and redemption in finding yourself again. Driven by a curiosity that grew by the minute, Emma began to explore the hotel corridors, as if she were walking through an enchanted and cursed maze at the same time. Each door seemed to whisper something different, as if it carried its own personality, its own time. Guided more by instinct than by reason, she turned the doorknob of room 2, As soon as the door opened, a familiar warmth enveloped her. It was her childhood. The living room of her grandmother's house, the toys scattered around, the smell of bread fresh from the oven. Emma saw herself, at 6 years old, laughing innocently, running in socks across the polished floor. She felt a lump in her throat. That was a memory that hurt because it was so sweet. An invitation to nostalgia, but also a reminder of everything she had left behind, of how much compassion for herself, at that fragile stage, still needed to be exercised. In the next room, the scene changed completely. It was her future. A modern office, glass walls, the muffled sound of important meetings. There, Emma saw herself differently, older, confident, firm in her decisions. But her gaze seemed tired. Despite the apparent achievement, there was loneliness there. An emptiness in the middle of her chest, as if something vital had been left behind. The visit to that possible time revealed an uncomfortable truth. Success without affection is noise without melody. She understood there that the choices we make out of fear can imprison us more than any hotel. It was a hard lesson, but an enlightening one. Wisdom sometimes comes with the bitter taste of renunciation. And understanding this is an act of respect for one's own essence. In a third room, the lights were off. When she turned them on, Emma saw herself in front of a huge mirror, surrounded by versions of herself, thin, sad, smiling, aged, in love, lost. Each one represented a choice, a consequence. The room was silent, but the emotion came in waves. Some versions of her were crying. Others were laughing. One reached out her hand, as if asking for forgiveness. That room was a mosaic of humanity, not just hers, but everyone's. A reminder that within each of us, there are 1,000 paths and 1,000 doors. When she left, she felt different. She carried with her a new kind of power, that of kindness, to her own journey. And at that moment, through the cracks in the wall, she heard a whisper coming from another room. A call. A name from the past. And she knew that the next door would not be about herself, but about saving someone she had left behind. The call came like a wave of heat through the cold hallway. Emma, already accustomed to the whispers and enigmas of the Pinewood Inn, felt that this one was different. It was personal. The sound of her name echoed off the walls, but with a familiar intonation, almost like a song that the heart recognizes before the mind. She followed the voice to a half-open door at the end of the hallway, where the air seemed to vibrate at a different frequency. Inside, there was no furniture, only a figure standing in the half-light, looking out the window. When she turned around, Emma could barely contain her shock. It was her father, or rather, the living memory of him. That same look from when she was a teenager, before the fight that separated them for years. Time stood still, and in that moment, she understood. He was trapped there, between memories and regrets, waiting for the chance for reconciliation. The man, with a choked voice, said that he had arrived there after an accident, the same one that took him from the physical world. But his soul, marked by the guilt of not having apologized, had remained trapped in that place between times. "If you free me, you can come back, or not," he said. Emma felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. It was an impossible choice. Leave and get her life back, or stay to free him and perhaps lose herself forever. Every thought was a whirlwind. Understanding mixed with pain, love with doubt. How could she weigh the value of her own freedom against the salvation of someone she had hurt so much and loved so much? It was more than a logical decision. It was a test of courage, of selflessness, of trust. One of those moments when life demands that you put yourself in the background and listen to what your heart has to say. Emma took a deep breath. She looked into the eyes of the man who had raised her, who had failed her, who was now crying before her like a child. There, amidst tears and unspoken truths, she held out her hand. It was the embodiment of empathy, of forgiveness, of the humanity that so often escapes us out of pride or fear. In her choice, there was the humility of someone who understands that life is made of second chances, that rescuing someone from the past is often rescuing parts of herself. And when everything around her began to shake, the hotel went dark, doors closed with a bang, Emma didn't fight. She just smiled, because she had done what the power of goodness told her to do. And in that last moment, before everything disappeared, she heard his voice one last time. "You saved me, my daughter." And then, she woke up. The sound of the engine turning off and the cold breeze touching her face. That was how Emma woke up, as if she had emerged from a deep and silent dive. She was in the car, exactly where she had stopped the night before. The sky was clear, with no trace of a storm, no trace of the Pinewood Inn in sight, just tall trees and a natural silence, interrupted by the occasional birdsong. She looked around, trying to find the old red sign flashing, but all she saw was forest. Nothing but trees and a dirt road. The confusion reappeared, but this time accompanied by a strange feeling of peace, as if she had accomplished something important, even if she could not explain it. The doubt, however, returned with force when she picked up her cell phone to check the time. On the screen, an unexpected notification. "Checkout confirmed, Pinewood Hotel." Emma's heart froze. The screen glowed in contrast to the natural daylight. She tried to find a network signal, but the icon marked "No service." As she opened the photo gallery, her hands began to shake. There were dozens of images she hadn't taken: hotel hallways, reflections in mirrors, the newspaper with her obituary, even old Harold waving from a window. The photos looked like they had been taken by a third person, from angles she would never use. Each image was a piece of a puzzle that defied reason. This couldn't be a dream. It was too real. And deep down, she knew she had crossed an invisible border. Something inside her had changed forever. But the most pressing question remained: if all this had happened, how had the world around her not noticed? As she drove back to the city, the modern cars, the people with their cell phones, the loud sound of the radios, everything was where it should be. But Emma, deep down, knew she was no longer the same. She carried the certainty of having been in a place where time doubled, where choices had the weight of eternity, where love manifested itself as a mission and hope as a compass. And even with the usual landscape before her eyes, there were details out of place. A store that hadn't existed before. A friend who didn't remember meeting her. Small deviations like echoes of a parallel reality mixing with her own. And deep in her pocket, next to the car keys, she found something impossible. The old, rusty key to room 6. It was as if the hotel had let her go. But not completely. Days passed, but life did not return to its normal rhythm. Emma walked through the familiar streets as if she were walking through a hastily constructed scene. There was something wrong with the harmony of things. The sound of her footsteps seemed delayed, as if the world took a second longer to react to her movements. People spoke to her, but sometimes they hesitated, as if they saw something on her face that she could not even name. In the mirror, a faint scar appeared on her collarbone, a thin line that had never been there before. She tried to remember having done it, but there was no memory. Only the feeling that the line was a physical reminder of something that could not be forgotten. The Pinewood Inn, now gone, lived inside her. And inside it lived parts that might never leave again. At random moments, objects in her house would change places. Small blue lights would blink in the darkness of the room. And sometimes when she dreamed, she would hear voices. Voices that called for help, others that simply observed. She tried to talk about it with friends, but she received strange looks. "You're tired, Emma," they would say. But she knew She knew she had crossed a veil that most people don't even know exists. She knew that the choices made in that other world shape what we call the present. And that inside each of us there is a particular Pinewood Inn, a place where lost memories hide, where traumas still cry for redemption, where forgiveness needs to be given so that the soul can breathe. Emma now lived with more awareness, more empathy, more sincerity, and paradoxically, more silence. She began to carry a notebook with her. She wrote down dreams, feelings, signs. One day, she wrote, "Maybe the Pinewood Inn isn't a place. Maybe it's a part of me that only woke up when I needed to remember who I am." With each new dawn, she remembered a new detail of the experience, and with that, she reconstructed her own meaning of existence. She became more compassionate towards other people's mistakes, kinder towards other people's pain, braver when faced with things she didn't understand. Because now she knew, reality is a fragile fabric, embroidered with memories, choices, and silences. And sometimes the most important thing is not to escape from a strange place, but to understand why it appeared. The scar, after all, was the door that remained open. And those who have an open door inside themselves will never be the same again. And now tell me, after all this, do you still believe that everything is just coincidence? How many times in your life have you felt like you were going through a detour? That certain people, encounters, or places seem to carry a meaning that could not be explained with words? Maybe, just maybe, you have been in front of one of these doors. The big question is, did you have the courage to go through it? Emma's story shows us that sometimes what we need is not to understand everything, but to accept that there is something greater guiding our steps. And that within every doubt lies an invitation to transformation. And what about you? What door do you still need to open? Who do you need to free or forgive? What is still holding you back from a version of yourself that no longer makes sense? If this story touched you in any way, comment below. What was the part that touched you the most? I want to know. And if you believe that more people need to hear stories that provoke reflection, that bring inspiration, humanity, and courage to change, then subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because every week there is more. More stories that don't just tell, they transform.